I had this existing Mimic board which I needed to extend and wasn't entirely happy with the way the buttons were laid out. I wanted to add a little bit of extra over to the left hand side, extend the lines, put a couple of signals in, automated ones, and add a few little location features together with two extra buttons to override the automatic signals and address the typeface and size of these buttons. Now, the way I set out making a Mimic board is I look at the track that I'm trying to copy, and then I've taken photographs which I've imported into my CAD program and stitched them together. Then I've overdrawn the basic form so you get a bit of a rough idea of where the tracks are going and what you want to put where. I then take the line drawing and formalise it into a more geometric shape that you can then reproduce on your Mimic board. So here I've distilled it down to the basic tracks and junctions, and I've decided on the size of the new Mimic board. I've generated a strip to represent each track and each junction. From a library of signals, I've imported the necessary ones I want to use. I then colour them up into what zones I want to replicate and added the fonts and type to describe the junctions and the signals as required, and then finally here I have filled it in order to see what the panel will look like once it's painted and finished. The next step is to generate a line drawing which the laser cutter will see, and this one is for the holes that it's going to burn through the perspex sheet that I'm going to use for making the board, and onto which I've also added drilling jigs. I make my Mimic boards by creating PCB boards, that's printed circuit boards, onto which I add the components where the drill holes need to be, and then I start generating where the copper tracks will be on the printed circuit boards. So each signal has one running to it and running back to a multi-plug which I'll solder into the board, so that I can then disconnect the wiring harness from the board if I ever want to take the board out to work on or mend. Here I'm doing the switches for the point work. I decided to fit a slightly bigger switch. The ones I previously had were a little bit too small and too fiddly. This entire piece was harvested from the previous PCB board, and now I've hatched in blue where the copper's going to be left. And of course I need to reverse the image because I'm looking at it from the front, and when we etch it, it's on the back. Then I turn it into a pure line drawing of where the circuit tracks are going to be, and now the next stage is to transfer it onto copper clad board by masking the board and then laser cutting out the paths onto the board and then peeling away the mask and spray paint where I want the copper to be left behind. Next it goes into a solution of ferric chloride, which I usually warm up a little bit for better effect, and then it comes out looking like this, with the copper left underneath the mask and the copper you don't want has been dissolved away. Next stage is to just remove the mask with a little bit of cellulose fillers. I use cellulose paint as my spray mask. I find it's most resistant. And then you're left with these, which I'll give a slight clean up with a Scotch-Brite pad, and then over the top of this I lay a laser cut jig which has all the drill holes that I need to put through. You can see it's going around one by one, making the holes for the multi-way switches, and it eventually cuts out the outside perimeter line, which I will just lay over the copper board, and it should line up over the top of where I need to drill. There's various different size holes. The small components have a .8 drill bit, and then you've got bigger things for where bolts go through to bolt the multi-plugs to the back, and bigger holes for where I put the switches through. Right, this is what the front's going to look like once it's finished. Of course, I need a reverse image again because I engraved my boards from the back so they have a nice shiny appearance to the front, and this is the colours I'll need to spray. So I take a piece of clear Perspex, I spray it white first, and then I spray it black to mask any light coming through it. Drop it back into the laser, and then the laser raster engraves the Perspex, or raster engraves the paint. What it is doing is it's etching the paint away so you can see the clear Perspex through the board. Having engraved it, it's then a case of masking up the various areas you want to paint in whichever colour is the right one for that particular track. I use red for the up and blue for the down, and I used green for the goods and orange for the branch line. It might look a little bit messy, but because the black mask is there, you don't see any of the other colours bleeding through the wire. And finally, a bit of grey for the signal box. Now just peel off the protective front. It looks all fine, there's nothing stray there. Put it back on to protect it while I do the next part of the job. And you can see I've laid a sheet of black styrene over the back and glued it with double tape. Now I've installed two switches. This is a piece harvested from the original Mimic board. I reused that because it has all the key switches for the signals, but it doesn't have the points, and it doesn't have the additional two signals on it. They're made on these extra boards which add in. So in go the switches for the point operation. This is the pre-made up board for the automatic signals, and all it needs to be is soldered to the two switches that I'd already fitted in the board. The boards can be a little bit bouncy because they're only held by the screws on the switches, so I add these pieces of chemi wood, which is synthetic wood. It's very stable, and I'm gluing them on with some dichloromethane, which softens the styrene and glues into it. Final bit is to put a couple of screws in to hold the top edge of the board to the chemi wood blocks. And then some delicate soldering. LEDs going in for the signal repeaters, and then we have a quick look on the front, another quick examination, see if everything is in the right place, and fit the rotary knobs. They're held on with tiny little Allen screws. And that's the basic board done. Final part of the operation is to add the wood surround. I made this out of 9mm MDF, and I've sawn a rebate slot in, mitered the corners, and I'm just taping them into one continuous piece, which I'll then wrap around the board, and that should do the job nicely. There we go. Invert it, squirt a little bit of glue into the joins. You don't want too much because you don't want it coming out all over the surface of the board, which you've just spent lots of time keeping clean. Drop it into the rebate slot, fold the edges up and round, and then finally put a little bit glue on the closing edge, and then we'll tape it shut and leave it for a while to dry, and we should have the finished board ready to take home and fit to the railway. There's the finished Mimic board with the extra harness for the automated signals, and here it is fitted to the side of the baseboard. Just needs a bracket making and the additional wiring harness zip tied to the underside of the base, running up to the automated activators. As you see, as I turn switch 1 for signal 1, the indicator changes to amber and the signal changes to amber, and then the signal changes to green and the indicator shows green, and then back to red again. And signal 3 has 3 aspects, as you can see, changing, in addition to which it has a junction signal which is operated by a secondary switch underneath, but the junction signal will not show green if one of the yellow or green aspects is selected on the rotary switch. And now here we go, here's the point motor switches operating. You can see the 2 point motors winding across. They are cobalt slow action point motors, and the indicator on the Mimic board is actually driven by the feedback from the point. It's not just showing what the switch is switched to. And rebuilt Patriot class Planet sends the incline and tests the 2 automated signals as it passes over them. Right, I think that's a pretty successful mission this time, so much so that I have set to and built another board for one end of the fiddle yard, and have 1 more ready to build and 2 more in the design phase. Well, that worked great. Now what we really need here to complete the scene is a signal box, and it could do with an interior. I feel some 3D printing coming on. Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share, subscribe and ring the bell for notifications. Bye now.